So the webinar that we're hosting tonight, the purpose of this is to provide the pollination industry, beekeepers, and other interested people insights about the impacts of Varroa destructor on both the honeybee, but also on pollination-dependent industries. This webinar is also going to include an introduction to the National Transition to Management Program and what we're doing to help those pollination-dependent industries and beekeepers learn to live in this new state of play. We do propose to run another one of these next year. We know that this is a pretty busy time of year for both growers, but also for some of the pollination-dependent industries. So we will run another one and try and pick up the people that we've missed. Depending on the feedback, we'll also prepare future webinars as well, based on the questions that you ask, and to try and help the growers as much as possible as we learn to face Varroa. So I'm Tamara Prentice. I'm the National Varroa Mite Transition to Management Coordinator. Sorry, I probably should have started with that. We also have with me tonight Liz Frost. She's New South Wales Department of Primary Industry and Regional Development's Technical Specialist for bees. And then also Nadine Chapman. She's the National Transition to Management Training Coordinator. Both these ladies are international experts in Varroa, so we're very lucky to have them on board. And we've also got Rebecca Sloan. She's our pollination industry coordinator and has extensive experience in both the haw industries, and she's got a sideline of bees as well. So she'll give you a snippet of what we know so far. The presentation will go for around 40 minutes. There'll be about 20 minutes at the end for questions as well. There's a chat function, so if you've got any questions, chuck them in the chat. Depending how many we get, we might answer some as we go. Otherwise, we'll hold some to the end to discuss. And I hope that you find this super helpful. I know that others that we practiced on have in the past. So I might hand over to Liz.
Thanks, Tamara, and thanks everybody for joining us. I'll launch into a brief on Varroa biology. So what is this pest that we're learning to live with on the East Coast right now? Varroa destructor is the species name, and this is an ectoparasite. So it's a small mite, only just over a millimeter wide, long, and like 1.5 millimeter wide. So what this mite does is reproduces within the colony. So what you're seeing here is a mite on the honeycomb cell. There's a honeybee larvae behind it there. And what she'll be doing is searching for the exact stage larvae close to capping so that she knows she can go into that cell and submerge under the brood food under that larvae, and then be protected under that cell that will be capped by the workers within the colony, and she does all her reproducing within that colony. So the different stages of the mite I can show you in the next slide, and this one just shows just on that next slide, Joe, thank you. So this one shows the adult female, that bottom right maroon oval shaped individual, that is a mature female, and the immature stage to the left. There's different stages of the mites after they hatch from the egg or emerge from the egg, as we say. And the adult male is not something that typically even beekeepers would see unless they're uncapping and opening up that that brood within the brood nest of that pollinating or honey producing hive. So the different life stages of Varroa shown here. These are Australian Varroa that I've bided my time with some drone brood, the male brood, to make sure that there's ample time for Varroa under the cap cell to be at all stages. And the adult male, top right, fun fact, he never gets to the stage where the exoskeleton hardens. So once that adult bee emerges, he will dry out and die, essentially desiccate and die. So what's happening under that cell while all this is happening? Our mature, what we call foundress mite, so that female bottom right, she lays eggs in that capped cell with the developing honeybee larvae. It's going through its metamorphosis, so the pupation to adulthood stage. And she lays a male egg first. followed by female eggs, and the male mates as the females that hatch become sexually mature, and they feed on the developing pupae under that capped cell. So they're feeding on um, hemolymph and fat body tissue that's in that individual bee that's in the stages of metamorphosis. And the long-term effects of that is that it reduces the individual weight of the bee and that bee's lifespan potentially at low numbers of mites. And if you have higher numbers of mites in the cells, it could actually damage the development of that bee's appendages. Potentially, if it's a really highly infested cell, the wings could be damaged as well. And if you just click once more, Joe, this species that we've got, again, it's Varroa destructor. It's currently in New South Wales and has semi-recently been found in Victoria. We have a permitting system where beekeepers are allowed to go into Victoria potentially, or Victorian beekeepers into New South Wales for canola pollination or honey production. So anticipate that more beekeepers may find Varroa in Victoria, but it is hard to find at really low levels of infestation. And right now, beekeepers across New South Wales are finding it in some new areas. So once it's in an area, it requires management, and that will include miticides at some stage once we reach treatment threshold. So our symptoms, again, when you've got mites present in the brood, that can cause, at an individual bee level, reduced lifespan, at a colony level, overall brood decline, and what the impact of that is on the overall hive population. From a grower's perspective, the foraging force, the pollination force in that colony could be impacted. And at really high levels, a beekeeper might see that brood decline show in symptoms of parasitic mite syndrome. So brood that actually never hatches, bees are uncapping brood prematurely, and a beekeeper, if they shake all the bees off, they can look and see these prematurely uncapped cells or slumped larvae that have a couple Varroa on them as well. And Varroa remains notifiable, so whenever beekeepers find it, they should notify their state or territory government. We can go to the next slide, Joe. So following on from what is Varroa, this is that on the left, drone pupae. So this is the late stage pupae of the male honeybee, and that Varroa on the abdomen, underside of the abdomen, that's typically where you would find Varroa feeding also on an adult bee. Joe, if you could click once more, there's an adult bee underside. So that's a worker abdomen, the underside, and Varroa, it's quite small to the naked eye, but on a bee, it's massive. If it were kind of a size ratio to us, it would be the size of a dinner plate, on your belly, kind of feeding on your liver. So the bee's fat body is akin to our liver, has detoxification functions. It's a really essential organ to the honeybee. And in the larval and pupal stage, the Varroa in the cell feed on that pupae's hemolymph and fat body, and then on the adult bees, once the reproductive phase is done and the bee emerges as an adult, then the Varroa, any mature female mites, like the ones you see here, those dark kind of reddish maroon ones, then they will hang on to either a drone or a worker, and when they need to feed under the abdomen. So they're really hard to find unless you are actively monitoring for them with an alcohol wash. Like you can see in this image, the big circle, that's the underside of a jar that a beekeeper has taken a roughly 300 bee sample and is submerging those in methylated spirits or soapy water, for example, and agitating that sample and shaking out any Varroa that are in that sample. So you can see all the kind of oval-shaped dark dots there. Those are all individual female Varroa mites. And that would guide the beekeeper to say, I'm actually exceeding treatment threshold, and I need to consider what my options are here depending on the season. In the next slide, we'll talk about seasonality of Varroa a little bit. This is a slide from a North American group, Honeybee Health Coalition, and take this one with a grain of salt. It's educational because this is what we might expect a couple years down the track. This is where Varroa is established in North America. They can expect certain things to happen. They've got 4 seasons, typically a dormant season being winter in this instance, and then population increase spring, peak population summer, population decrease autumn. So from our perspective, we need to think with the grower hat on. If you have any early pollination, your beekeepers need to be additionally thinking not only is my population and my food stores in my hive right in autumn to meet a springtime pollination contract, but are my mite levels under control, that I can be sure that they're not going to cause me problems in winter before the pollination season starts. So we came through the Varroa emergency response. We couldn't eradicate Varroa, and now it's establishing. And what is that like? I guess I can provide one small example. After the transition to management was formally called, I found a swarm, and that was in an area that hadn't been baited, and it had been removed. Managed hives had been eradicated from that zone, but feral hives hadn't been wild European honeybees hadn't been baited in that zone. So I thought, okay, well, I'll take a sample from the swarm and I'll establish it and see how it goes in this region. So that colony had a 12% infestation rate of Varroa as a swarm, and that meant that it needed immediate miticide treatment, either synthetic or organic treatment. And I also implemented mechanical mechanical controls. So on the next photo, that'll just show you a bit of an image. This kind of a frame, the queen only lays drones in, and the male honeybees are much more attractive to Varroa for the reproductive phase. So you can use it as kind of a decoy or a trapping mechanism for lots of Varroa mites. And this image just shows a beekeeper tool that I've used to uncap a drone cell and show the larvae there. And that larvae was only recently capped. So that tells me all the mites, those 4 mites on that larvae, are all foundresses that have infested that cell. There's been no reproduction yet in that cell. So typically, you would hope to only find maybe one of those mites occasionally in a little patch of brood. But this one had heaps. It had hundreds in this this big cell, this large frame. And that tells me that there's a pretty high infestation because I'd already treated the hive at this point with a miticide that had 95% efficacy. So that, I suppose, is a word of caution to anybody that hasn't found Varroa yet. Definitely be looking monthly while ever you have brood in the colony. If you haven't found mites yet, you'll want to be doing your monthly either alcohol wash, soapy water wash, or sugar shake, while ever you have brood in the colony on, say, 8 hives per apiary if you're at a commercial scale. In the next slide, we've just got a photo capturing our dynamic heat map at a point in time, June last year. So this is a tool that I encourage growers to have a look at on the varroa.org.au website. And while the detection here are voluntary, beekeepers report the results of their monitoring, either negative or positive, in different levels. It's still an indication of the spread and establishment of Varroa. So the kind of middle red blob, the upper bit, that's where I caught that swarm that had a 12% infestation rate. And it took a lot of work to keep it productive for the whole 12 months. I made 66 kilos of honey, but I had to treat it with miticides twice. And I was using a mechanical control that whole time, removing full sheets of drone comb whenever they were capped. So there's a bit more labor and input outlay to be expected for any beekeepers in New South Wales soon, if you're not already experiencing Varroa. Beekeepers are used to monitoring for pests and diseases. In the next slide, it just shows a still of the Biosecurity Code of Practice. That's our guiding document that industry and government have worked together to develop, and it's a standard that states regulate certain components of. So beekeepers that follow the code of practice are the ones that you want to get to pollinate your crops. They're at minimum checking all their hives twice a year for pests and diseases, now including Varroa, and the transition to management is updating this document. The next slide shows the common ways that Varroa can get around. Growers might be wondering, what can I do? How can I do anything about Varroa risks? Most of the onus is on the beekeeper. The Varroa will be there to stay once they get it in their hives, and they need to actively monitor a certain percentage in their apiaries regularly to plan for their miticide treatments and plan their year to ensure they can meet pollination contracts. So moves in a number of ways, but once it's in a population of hives, it's here to stay. And my last slide, just a bit of a quick dive into pollination and what that means. What does Varroa mean for growers? And essentially, it means the beekeeper needs to step up monitoring, understand what their levels are over the season, and act accordingly. So decide at what points in the season they're going to treat, that they have a treatment window depending on the treatment's restrictions, so that they can meet the pollination standard for the specific crop. So in the image on the left, there's a range of hive strengths here, what a grower would want to see if they've got a nut crop or a stone fruit crop, for example, would be the bottom right, that 8 frames of bees hive. And a healthy hive can be, as with Varroa. It can't have Varroa. You just need to control your levels below the treatment threshold. And we've got a lot of tools to help beekeepers on the varroa.org.au website. So I suppose the last thing I'll part with that will segue nicely into Nadine's is you might hear from my accent that I'm not from here. I'm not from around here, California. And in California, once Varroa got into the US, it took around estimated 7 years for about 87% of the feral colonies to die. So that really changed pollination because growers were relying on feral colonies quite heavily in California, where a huge percentage of the state's fruits, nuts and veg come from. And also, not only did it decimate the overall hive number, but the life expectancy of a feral colony shortened drastically. So typically they last around 3.5 years and then were reinfested, for example, but now they would only last about 6 to 12 months in California. So I would encourage everybody, to think about, okay, what is my hive requirement? Is it 6 to 7 per hectare? Is it 2 to 3 per hectare? And am I getting that through a contract at the moment, or what percentage is contract versus native or feral pollinators? And have a good think. I think I've run over time, so I'll pass it over to Dr. Chapman.
Hey, everyone. So what hive losses can we expect? The Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestries looked at all the available evidence and released a report in 2011. And based on that, they've said, we'll probably lose between 2 and 5% of our managed hives. And in Australia, we've got over 866,000 managed hives. So that would translate to somewhere between 17,000 and 43 or 44,000 hives that we would be expecting to lose. So this is based on evidence from overseas, but that evidence wasn't necessarily collected at the time it was all happening. So, you've got a bit of memory bias possibly in there. It wasn't like somebody was actually counting the number of hives. So we're basing what we think might happen on incomplete evidence from overseas. If we can go to the next slide. And so what our best evidence probably is what is happening in New South Wales. And a lot of these stories are coming in via our Varroa development officers, and they go out and do site visits to help people either check for Varroa or manage Varroa. And so they are going out and seeing dead hives. So here on the left, you can see hopefully that there's a lot of dead adult bees around that hive that's died. And on the right, we've got sometimes if the brood cells are heavily infested, the workers might take all of the brood out of that colony. So that's all brood that's been dumped, and that colony's also died. And we're having stories of, for example, somebody has 30 colonies in an apiary, and all but one of them is dead, and one of them's nearly dead, that one that was still surviving. And then we've also had reports of a beekeeper losing a whole load of bees. And a load of bees is however many colonies can fit on a truck. And that depends on the size of your truck, obviously. And there can be, obviously Varroa is the main, is the cause of those colony deaths, but there can be inexperience is definitely part of that. So when somebody's applying a treatment, if they do that wrong, then yes, they can kill their bees. Also, if beekeepers don't know that they've got Varroa in the area, or they might have been living under a rock and they don't know that Varroa is even a thing in Australia, so they might not be looking at all or as often as they need to. So that's why, like Liz said before, we're really changing our advice from every 16 weeks to, particularly once you've got Varroa, looking at your mite loads every 4 to 6 weeks, so that you are on the ball there. Because yes, my mite load might be low today, but Varroa is constantly reproducing at the moment, so it can go up exponentially. Next slide. Okay, so now we're turning to the feral population. So the honeybee is not native to Australia, so that's why we refer to them as feral. So that's our unmanaged population. To work out how many colonies we're losing, we need to know how many feral colonies are out there. And as you can see, we've only examined this in a small corner of the country, really. And we've got two different techniques. So in red dots there, we've got where people have gone out and searched for all the bee colonies in an area. So they're looking at as many trees as high up as they can, looking for cavities to see if they've been taken up by honeybees. Or they can put out sugar feeders and then follow the bees back home once they come and forage on it. And for that, we've got colony densities of between 0.1 colonies and 150 colonies per kilometre squared. There's also another technique using genetics, and we can see on the right here, we've got a photo of a weather balloon, and it's connected via fishing line to a net, and in that we've put queen pheromones. So the drones, the males, are going to be attracted to that, and they'll come and fly in. They're not that clever. If it smells good, it doesn't even have to look like a queen. They'll go up there, and I've personally collected more than 1,000 drones in about an hour. So you can get a lot of drones with this technique. Then we go and test them, do their genetics, and we can work out how many colonies are in the area. And we've so far got estimates of between 0.1 and 10 colonies per kilometre squared. And you'll be looking at that going, well, they're very, very different. Which one's correct? And I would say that they're both correct. So when people are doing those surveys, it's more of a local scale. They can only look at so many trees in so much of an area. So it's much more of a local scale. And how many colonies are there is heavily dependent, or entirely dependent, really, on how many cavities there are for them to make nests in. And some trees will make cavities, some won't. Different species, there might have to be a certain age in order to have those cavities. So that's the main limiting factor there. I think. And then, yeah, with the genetic technique, it's more of a landscape scale. So it's a bit more of an average. It's really defined by how far drones are going to get attracted to that queen pheromone and how far they're willing to fly to get to it. So that's why it's at a more wider scale than those surveys. Next slide. Okay, and just to show you, where you might find some of these colonies. This is one of my colleagues trying to take a sample from a feral colony. So you can see it's up really high. So imagine it's a hot day, and are you going to notice those little bees flying in and out of there? So you might not actually find all of the colonies. So this report found that based on everywhere else, we would lose between 16 and 90% of our feral bee colonies after several years. So not immediately, it can take some time, and populations may eventually recover. So those that are susceptible will die out, and eventually the survivors might be able to come in and repopulate. And obviously if it's 90%, that's a huge, huge impact on the industries that are dependent on honeybees. And I'm sure you're looking at that and going, well, where are we going to be? Is it going to be 16%? Is it going to be 90%? And I'll go into that a bit more on the next slide. Okay, so most of our knowledge on Varroa management comes from Europe and North America. And that makes sense because in Australia we have bees from Europe and America also has European bees. But we don't have a climate like Europe and North America. As Liz spoke about, we can have brood in Australia, like most of Australia can have brood most of the year, whereas they will have a complete shutdown over winter. And that has some different implications for us. So I would say that we have a climate more like Africa and South America. And the bees in Africa are quite resistant to Varroa. They do have Varroa, but we're not seeing huge colony losses. And then in South America, the bees there are a hybrid of African and European bees. And because they were also introduced, they're not from that continent. But they've got a lot more of the African ancestry in them. And they also seem to be quite resistant. And so we could think it's just about genetics, but I think that it's likely environment also plays a role there. So for example, if there was drone brood present all year, and we know that Varroa prefers drone brood, then perhaps they'll leave the worker brood alone, and that could result in more healthy workers, which means a more healthy colony. And we don't really know exactly what's going to happen, but it's important that we're finding out what is happening in terms of our colony losses and what are the factors that are going into whether people are losing low or high numbers of colonies. And beekeepers will be able to participate early next year in a colony loss survey. So if there's any beekeepers listening here tonight, be on the lookout for that. And now I will pass over to Beck.
So just a quick reminder before we go on that if you have a question or a comment, to use your QA function instead of raising your hand, and then we'll respond to those questions at the end. The chat function has also been disabled, so you won't be able to put anything in the chat for anyone to see either. All right, so on this first slide, the Australian agriculture, while it has changed over the decades, it is based largely on European practices. And with the vast majority of our crop types being species that have been introduced into the Australian climate, making the European honeybee the most important component of our farming practices. For some of our pollination industries, being 100% reliant on pollination to achieve a saleable crop. Honeybees are not just important for fruit or seed set, but they also have key attributes such as quality and shape of crop, storage life, and also the consistency of harvest, making them all mature at the same rate. The European honeybee are known to be generalists and have been able to adapt to a broad range of environments and visit a large range of plant types. This, along with our vast knowledge of how to manage these bees, have made them the preferred pollination species to achieve our desired outcomes for an individual pollination crop. Australia does have other pollination options, such as our native stingless bees. However, few of these options can provide the same versatility and scale as the European honeybee. In the tropics and subtropics, there are native stingless bees which are able to be kept in hives and managed like the European honeybee, providing similar pollination results. However, their range is limited and they do not survive in the more temperate zones, so cannot be considered a reliable replacement for the use of the honeybee. This is not to say that we should give up on the alternate pollinators option, but view them as a complementary option to our pollination program. Utilise them where possible, to replace feral honeybee populations that have disappeared due to the incursion of Varroa. Next slide, please, Jo. It is anticipated that the feral honeybee colonies will disappear, or certainly not be at the same density that they currently survive at today. There is also evidence to suggest that even if you do have a feral honeybee colony on your property, depending on the mite load present in that colony, they may not be able to provide the same level of pollination they did prior to Varroa. It has been suggested that the invested individuals deposit fewer pollen grains onto flowers they visit, and often visit flowers for a shorter period of time. Therefore, there is less pollen foraging activity. This reduction in normal bee activity can potentially lead to the reduction or loss of fruit or seed set. With this in mind, conversations need to be had with your beekeeper or broker to manage the number of hives that may be required for your crop. Keeping in mind also that if you no longer have the feral colonies, the managed colonies will need to be put in place to maintain the pollination level that was achieved prior to Varroa. It is worth noting that if you have feral honeybee colonies surviving on your property, that you should alert your beekeeper to their location so they can make management decisions to ensure that the health of their hives for both you and your future pollination programs. With Varroa taking hold, it is anticipated that many beekeepers may leave the industry. The majority of these will be recreational beekeepers. Excuse me. And this will have little to no bearing on the industry's requirements for pollination. Where the biggest impacts will be felt is through the cost of pollination services, and it's predicted that there could be as little as a 30% increase in management costs associated with maintaining the honeybee colonies. So with the increase in management costs and some beekeepers finding it no longer viable to provide pollination services. This creates a twofold problem for the pollination-dependent industries. The first being that there may be a reduction in the number of managed hives available to perform all the pollination requirements across the country, with the flow on from the reduced number of hives causing increased demand will potentially lead to an increase in the cost per hive to the grower to fill their pollination needs. Tracking hive numbers now, as Varroa establishes, will also help us to understand the structural changes of the honeybee industry moving forward. This will help determine the effect of the pollination-dependent industries and their pollination needs into the future. Currently, there are approximately 632,000 commercial hives required to provide all the necessary pollination services, along with some help from our feral populations. These numbers are generalised and is based on technical information around prescribed hives per hectare, depending on the crop type we're talking about. These numbers are not exact, and registrations ebb and flow, and pollination events are not all simultaneous, with there being overlap between individual industries requiring hives. By 2026, it is anticipated that the demand for managed hives will increase to 876,000. Next slide, thanks, Jo. Changing how the hives are distributed through your crop may also help. Traditionally, hives have been placed in large numbers around the perimeter of a crop. Alternate thoughts of smaller drops throughout the crop have shown to have better pollination potential. This will also help when weather is not ideal for bee activity and bees don't fly as far from their hives. When your bees arrive, it is also critical in achieving great pollination. You don't want all your hives arriving at the same time. And at the end of flowering, you don't want them all leaving at the same time. On average, bees should start to arrive at 5% full flower across the crop. This will vary depending on the type of crop we're talking about. And if you can't avoid all your hives arriving at the same time, then making sure you have something else for your bees to eat. We don't want anything too nice though, as we want the bees to return to the target crop once enough flowers have come out. Once your bees arrive, you need to make sure they are doing their job. Take a stroll through your crop, look for the bees. You need to see them on your target flowers, not just flying to one, but flying to most of the flowers. Keep in mind that the bees won't be very active in the morning or in the temperatures below 15 degrees. So you may need to do this check a couple of times across the day. If you don't see bees, or if you see large numbers of bees flying away from your flowers, you need to contact your beekeeper immediately so that this can be sorted and your pollination can continue. While the bees are on your property, you need to make sure they're safe. Good access to the drop-off and sites for the hives. No chemical use during pollination. Talk to your beekeepers and agronomists to make sure that your spray regime fits with your pollination schedule and the chemicals to be used are bee-friendly. Register your farm on the Bee Connected app so that any beekeepers know what's happening on your farm. Be you being pollinated or the next door neighbour using bees because the spray caused drift. Clean water access points. And I will also be very shortly sending out to all of the peak industry bodies and industry development officers a copy of an on-farm guide for honeybee management, which will cover off in more detail everything that I've spoken about tonight. That's me done. Thanks, Jo.
Sorry, there's got to be somebody that doesn't unmute in the process. So we're back to me, and thank you for that, Beck. So the incursion of Varroa has resulted in the largest plant pest response in Australia's history. And obviously it's got far-reaching consequences, both for the beekeeping industries, but also those of you here tonight and the pollination industries. So plant pest responses are dealt with through a national framework overseen by what we call the National Management Group. This group's made up of all of the government agencies, state and territory, as well as the federal government, and all of the industries which are going to be affected by that pest. So the National Management Group, which is the top square on your screen, they adopt a response plan which sets out what people are going to do and how we're going to transition to management, and then delegates most non-financial decisions to a second body, the Consultative Committee on Emergency Plant Pests, who are similar members but possibly lower down in the chain. There's also, in the case of Varroa, a coordination group which oversees the program of works because it's so big and we needed to get some quite quick decisions made because the deadlines are really quite tight. So within the national program, there's a bunch of staff employed. And so most of these are employed within the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development, but others are also within the Australian Honeybee Industry Council as well. And we've also got extension and engagement staff, so those people doing workshops and one-on-one training sessions in each state and territory to make sure that we can reach right across the nation. You can see on the screen that we have a lot of people to keep the program running. So I'm the national coordinator in that top left, as I mentioned. Nadine's the training coordinator, and she's got a team as well as 40-something contractors across the nation. The third blue box is Beck. She's sort of left to her own devices. Sorry, Beck, no big team for you. And then in the webinar, like in the background of this webinar, we've got a public information team, and there's various other roles as well that collect information and help make sure we can meet the targets of this plan. Next, please, Jo. So in September 2023, it was actually the National Management Group who have to make a decision as to the feasibility of eradicating a plant pest. God, I can't say this. A plant pest. Anyway, emergency plant pest. So they decided in September 23 that that was no longer feasible in terms of Varroa in Australia. So from September 23 until February 24, there was a lot of discussion around the table about how Australia could best transition agriculture to management in the face of Varroa. The transition to management phase of an emergency plant pest response aims to help industry, government and the community to be best prepared for living or managing in the face of this new emergency plant pest. Transition to management has to be completed within a specific time frame. So generally it's 12 months and usually this plan would have ceased in February 2026. We've been granted an extra 12-month extension, just again due to the size and the scale of this response and the need to get education across all of Australia basically within the response plan period. So we're around, as I mentioned, to Feb 26, and we'll aim to get as much information to you as we can during that time. But we do know that in a lot of places, Varroa won't have established, or if it has, those hives won't have died out by the time the plan finishes. So what we're also looking to do is create an information and a resources legacy, which hopefully people will remember and find when the time comes to deal with Varroa themselves. Next slide, please, Jo. So the transition to management plan that's been adopted for Varroa has got 4 objectives. Objective 1 is the completion of the earlier V3 response plan, which was the eradication plan. So that included the tracing and surveillance activities, compliance, voluntary euthanasia activities, as well as the wild European honeybee baiting program. It's mostly been completed. There's a couple of pending court cases, and once they're done, we can close that one out. Objective 2 is the largest focus of the plan. So a decision was made by those affected parties that educating beekeepers was the best way to manage Varroa and to slow down its spread. And the more we can slow that down, the better, or the more time we've got to prepare other industries for the loss of those wild honeybees and to learn how to deal more so with the managed hives that you'll need in the future. So objective 2 includes both the formal training and the in-field support for beekeepers. It also includes updates to the bee biosecurity documents like the code of practice, code of conduct that Liz mentioned earlier. We're also doing things like upskilling national lab staff in Varroa testing and benchmarking bee viruses, which can make the impacts of Varroa far worse. Objective 3 is around regulations and compliance actions to slow the spread of Varroa through the movement of bees and bee products. This has to be balanced against the need for bees to move to meet pollination requirements and also for commercial pollination operations to remain viable because we're going to need them more in the future, as Beck mentioned. It also includes a program to encourage beekeepers to submit Varroa surveillance results so we can track where it's got to. And you'll see both Liz and I think it was Liz and I, have put up this map, the heat map. So the heat map is produced based on submitted monitoring results. The blue is where beekeepers have tested and found Varroa to be absent, and the red is where they've tested and found Varroa. So you can see we've got Varroa basically up along the east coast of New South Wales. The darker the colour, the more testing has been done. Queensland also has a map like this, and we're working with the other states to get them done as well. Objective 4 is around helping impacted industries into the future. So we're doing a pollination options report for when those wild bees are no longer around so much. We're looking at upskilling queen bee breeders, and we've got obviously the heat map, mapping spread, and the colony loss survey that was mentioned earlier as well. So we can track actually what the rate of loss is that we're seeing in managed hives across Australia and compare that against other parts of the globe. Next, please, Maestro. So as I mentioned, the Varroa T2M plan was put together by all of the impacted parties, which included the pollination-dependent industries. So it includes work specifically to help those industries as well. So Rebecca Sloan, who spoke earlier, she's been put on to help those pollination-dependent industries prepare for increased reliance on managed hives. because we know that those wild hives are going to reduce based on the information that you've just been presented with. So Beck's been sharing information with key stakeholders to date and has also started preparing a pollination guide. So that guide will aim to help growers better understand the needs of bees and beekeepers and how to get the best outcomes for themselves from having managed hives within their orchards. The plan also envisages a pollination options report. So this work is planned for next year, but we are also looking at the Australian pollination strategy, which has just been funded through the Wean Bee Foundation. We don't know if that Wean Bee work will include an options report, and if it does, we won't duplicate that. So we're just waiting to have a bit of a chat to them. So the T2M team, and mostly Beck, is also working on training for industry development officers. So this presentation tonight, we actually gave to extension officers and industry development officers a few months ago, and then just improved it based on the feedback that we got. We're also proposing more webinars as well for those extension and IDOs or industry development officers to make sure that they're best prepared for when Varroa starts to hit their industries as well. Next, please, Joe. So what we've got here on the screen are a couple of QR codes. So one of those will take you to what training workshops are currently available in your area if you are a beekeeper and do want to learn a lot more about Varroa in a lot of depth and the chemical controls and integrated pest management and other things that are available. And the second QR code there is just to sign up for our weekly newsletter. We'll also share with you a survey link to the pollination survey and to sign up for the pollination email that we've got going as well after this. But that's the end of our formal presentation, which I hope you found interesting. I know there's a lot of doom and gloom in there. The outlook is not great in terms of, you know, obviously eradication would have been by far the best outcome for all of us, but no such luck. And so now we're going to do the best we can do to support each other to get through this next phase as we learn to live with it. And we might go to the questions. I can see that we've got a few there, so I'll just drag those onto my screen. So one of them is, when will we get Varroa in Western Australia? So I don't know who wants to answer this one. Nadine, you were talking a little bit about spread. Did you want to jump in?
Well, how long is a piece of string? We don't know exactly when it will get there, and Western Australia is definitely hoping to keep it out indefinitely. And the key thing to keeping it out is making sure that beekeepers do not illegally move hives from other states into Western Australia, because that's not allowed. The other way it could come in is through feral hives, and the state has put out some sentinel hives. So that's empty boxes that will hopefully be very attractive to any feral hives. So they'll be able to catch them, test them for Varroa, and get onto it and know if they need to do something to make sure that they don't get in.
Thank you, Nadine. So another question we've got is how quickly will the wild bees die out in an area once Varroa gets there? I think we mentioned a few years, but Liz, if you've got have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, we've got some examples around New South Wales, and folks, you know, beekeepers have their bee goggles on and they see bees everywhere and they know where the feral hives are. And beekeepers that are colleagues of Nadine's at Western Sydney Uni have been looking at feral hives on that campus for probably decades. And the latest update she got from them, all but one of the feral colonies they've been tracking was dead, and that was, I think, over a month ago. So I'd be curious to know how that lone feral hive is going. And I guess in the previous eradication zone where there wasn't any baiting, we have members of the public say after hive eradication, they didn't see a bee. So clearly there'd been a reduction in bees from the eradication and removal of managed hives. But now we're also seeing things like feral hives dying or feral hives absconding, potentially reestablishing, but then with no active management or mite control, crashing again or absconding again eventually. crashing and dying. So we thought it might, we've had the overseas examples of a couple of years, but in some areas it's happening very quickly in New South Wales. The ferals are dying.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, it's a bit hard because, as Nadine mentioned, we've got different species of bees here to what they've got in similar climates across the globe. So we're very much learning on the fly with everyone else that's involved. Thank you. So another question we've got here is, how can I attract beekeepers to my farm who are managing Varroa well? So we might go to you, Beck, for this one, if that's okay.
That is fine. So the best thing, and it's a good thing to make contact with your local beekeeping association as well. They will be all over who is keeping bees within your area, but also making sure your farm is bee friendly. So plan all your crops with bees in mind, making sure that your hive placement or places where you want the hives to be is well maintained, that you have alternate flowering types. So if you want bees to be there longer than just your crop pollination, that you've got alternate floral sources them to eat on. And the most important things are that you have pollination contracts in place that include spray programs, that you've spoken to everyone who needs to be involved, be they contractors, farm staff, the beekeepers, that you have regular conversations, and hopefully whoever this person is in association with, whatever their crop type is, that their peak industry body has been sending them out all the information. If not, if you go to the website, you can contact me directly and then I can send you everything else. But very, very soon there will be a best management, like I said in my presentation, on-farm best management guide for honeybees coming out, which highlight everything you can do year-round to make sure that you get the best beekeepers, and beekeepers seek you out because they know their bees are going to go home as healthy as they can.
That's awesome. Thanks, Beck. And I think, yeah, it'd be great if those of you on the call want to share that information with some of your friends so that you stay as a top priority for beekeepers going forward as you need managed hives. We'll answer one more question and then we might call it a night. So we've had a couple of questions coming in around the New South Wales videos and whether they'll be around until February 2026. So we are looking at that at the moment. So the videos in New South Wales, they were put on before that extension was granted, and there's a limited amount of money for videos in each state and territory. But we do have a little bit of room to wriggle there. So we are looking at what we can do in that space. But yeah, hopefully it would be great if we could, and particularly because we're really learning lessons on the ground from those videos and how beekeepers are managing in New South Wales that we're then sharing with the other states so that everyone else gets the benefit from the lessons being learned here. But yeah, I think that's us for the night. So thank you everybody for dedicating the time to learn about what the impacts of Varroa are expected to be. I appreciate in the eastern states it's getting a bit late. In the western states it's probably dinner time. So thank you for sharing your time with us. And yeah, we might see you at the next one. Thank you very much.